I blame those movies. I blame my dad. My dad also is like, he's like, as soon as I grabbed your thumb, I had this bond. I was like, I look back and I was like, you're a liar. Because like I did not have that bond with my oldest right away. And learning that that's okay is really important.
Hello and welcome to the Dad Dialogue podcast, the show where we talk about the successes and the stresses of becoming a dad and being a dad. My name is Lawrence. I am your host. Thank you so much for joining us today. Quick reminder, you can go over to daddialogue.co.uk if you would like to learn more about the show or sign up to be a guest on a future episode. Today's guest is Devin Krotman. Devin is based in the US. He's got 2 young girls. In our conversation, we talk about a lot of different things, but this is quite a unique episode, as this is the first episode where the guest has been doing parenting at the time. His daughter was supposed to take a nap during our time, but she didn't, so Devin was actually keeping an eye on her, and towards the end of the episode you can probably hear some of the noises in the background, but it was super cool to chat to Devin and have that authenticity of real life parenting at the time. In our conversation we dive into lots of different things, like being a stay-at-home dad, starting a dad's group, and talking about early fatherhood feelings, as well as the communication of expectations with a partner. And we also have a bit of a tangent about talking about football, but then bring it back into relating to parenting and kind of planning those experiences and making those experiences for children. So a lot to get into. Thank you so much for being with us today. Let's get into the conversation. Devin, thank you so much for joining us, the Dad Dialogue podcast today. Can you just start off by telling our listeners just a little bit about yourself and your family?
Yeah, my name's Devin Krotman. I'm located in the U.S., specifically in Nashville, Tennessee, for the time being. And my wife and I have 2 young girls and are expecting a 3rd kid, a boy, in early 2025. And I'm trying to think. My wife and I have been together for a while. We love growing our family, and my current role is to be a stay-at-home dad. I'm doing some consulting on the side, but I've really, in the last 6 to 12 months, kind of fully committed myself to being a stay-at-home dad. And I'm grateful that my wife has a career that allows me to do that. And for the most part, I love this job. It's the coolest job I've ever had. Doesn't mean it doesn't come without its challenges, but I know I'm going to look back on this time and be appreciative. So that's kind of where we're at. We have a very young family, a dog, 2 young ones, and a 3rd on the way, and just trying to take it day by day.
For sure. Well, congratulations on the welcoming your 3rd in early 2025. That's going to be awesome. I'm curious, you said in the last 6 to 12 months, that's what it's kind of looked like. What does that process look like? Was it a kind of a hard cutoff, or did you find yourself kind of dropping some responsibilities and picking up more parenting? Like what did that process kind of look like to become the stay-at-home parent?
Yeah, it definitely was not in like my 5-year plan, to be honest.
Oh,
Like I think after our 2nd one was born, I was on paternity leave, and then a few months into that paternity leave, I found out that my job would no longer keep me, so I essentially got laid off.
Okay.
Initially, the idea of being a stay-at-home dad didn't really cross my mind. We had childcare taken care of for the oldest one, and the newest one was staying with my wife. But as I started to like look into the jobs and see the demands that my wife's job had, I sort of like organically came to that point. So I continued to look for jobs, and then after not having much success, but also kind of seeing that maybe this might be the best decision, that's how I sort of arrived at it. And we had a part-time nanny that helped us with the youngest one, and then the oldest one was going to daycare. So as I kind of came to that decision, we sort of changed our plans, allowed our oldest one to go to daycare full-time, and then we had our nanny move on to another family. So it was a process for me to get there, and my wife was really supportive. But yeah, I think sometimes people have a plan for life, and this was definitely outside the plan that I had. And I'm okay with that, though, because life is going to throw you lots of challenges.
Especially when you have young kids, that's just what life is thinking on your feet and lots of challenges coming your way and not fitting into specific plans.
Yeah.
Like we discussed before we started filming.
Exactly.
So what have you found to be some of the main challenges of kind of taking on that role as the stay-at-home parent?
Yeah, I think the hardest thing for me is that, how do I phrase this? Like, you have to be ever present and understand that everything you do is going to be modeled. So like, during a regular workday, you can maybe check out, do certain things, shift your mind. And it's not that you can't do that as a stay-at-home dad, but you have little ones to take care of you, so the opportunities for that are few and far between. And then the second thing is,
Mm.
you know, they model everything you do. So while I consider myself a pretty mild-tempered person, like, there's times I get frustrated or sad or
Mm.
mad, and I think it's okay to feel those emotions and explain those to my kids, uh, but learning more about why I feel those emotions and telling them to my girls and understanding that they don't trying to make sure that they don't copy the bad habits that I've learned about myself, because I'm here all the time, right? Like, there's times that, like, you
Mm.
know, everything you do, they're gonna watch, and so, like, I
Mm.
continue to try to be present and figure that out and make gradual improvements on that. And I don't know how you feel about that, what your hardest challenge is as being a father. And like, I mean, I just, it's something I found out.
Yeah, I mean, so I've been a stay-at-home dad for a little over a year now.
Okay.
We moved from Hong Kong, which is where our kids were born, to the Netherlands a little over a
Right.
year ago to focus on family time and to kind of like get out of the kind of big craziness. It's a very busy city. Like it just wasn't kind of like meeting kind of what I specifically wanted for our family and get closer to family in Europe. So, and with that, we made that decision to move, and then we started looking at like what a job's going to look like because my wife and I are both
Yeah.
teachers.
Okay.
So we just came to the decision like this is something that we can do. Like I did some thinking and some research about it, and I was like, yeah, like I think it's better to make the decision now, kind of like before we made the move, so then I could prepare for it. And at that time, we didn't know how long it would be for, but like kind of at least 6 months, because the biggest thing that we didn't want to do was, or at least I didn't want to take a job and then have that pressure of finding daycare for them, my two kids,
Yeah.
because in Hong Kong we have like a live-in nanny, um, and they had always had like 1-to-1 or 1-to-2 kind of care like that, so they'd never been to a
Right.
daycare.
Is that part of the culture in Hong Kong?
Yeah,
That,
yeah, you pretty much can't
yeah.
find a daycare. It doesn't really exist like that. What we in maybe in the Western world would perceive as like
Okay.
daily care, but like it's more of like kind of. I mean, there's obviously like preschool starts quite early for kids, but there is no solution if you're two working parents. There's no solution aside from kind of having a live-in help or
Right.
family members, let's say, if you're two working parents. So yeah, that's just part of the culture. That's just what you do. And that was good for a time and a period, but we just wanted something different. So we moved to, and yeah, then like you said, like being a stay-at-home dad, it just kind of you do kind of miss those moments of like switching off your brain a little bit because it's just the
Yeah.
opportunity cost is so much higher for that sort of thing of like, oh, if I want to kind of like slack off and just, I don't know, scroll on my phone or watch a video or something,
Yeah.
catch up on like football highlights or whatever, that's just not necessarily possible at all times. And the opportunity cost is much greater because you might be taking away something that impacts your children in a positive way. But like, yeah, when you're working for someone, you kind of feel entitled to kind of take away some, you're not going to give 100% of yourself all the time, but then if you're taking something away from your kids, that feels tough.
Yeah, it does.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can definitely empathize with that. And I think another, as you were talking, I was thinking about another struggle, and I don't know if you share with this because we live in different countries, but cultural norms and societal norms have definitely progressed and changed, and I think you see more stay-at-home dads. I still find it, I mean, and I live in the South, the southern part of the US, which is a much
mm,
different culture, but I find it's still a unique niche role to kind of figure out, and like what are the standards and how to organize play dates.
mm,
It's hard to put like adequately find the verbiage to describe it, but there's still like a little awkwardness around being a
yeah.
stay-at-home dad, whether it's the way people perceive you or treat you, and this can be from like family or friends or from other people. And I think like treading those waters or talking to other stay-at-home dads has helped me figure that out, because there's more resources available, but there's really like this is a somewhat newish role for stay-at-home dads to play in the society. Like, I think you've always had them, but they're becoming more present, and it's just
Mm,
still there's still this weird framework
mm,
around it. I don't know how you feel, if you felt that
mm.
over in Amsterdam. You're in Amsterdam, right?
Near Amsterdam, we're in a
Near
city
Amsterdam.
that's
Okay.
like just like 45 minutes south of Amsterdam.
Okay.
I think like I've spoken to other dads. I've actually it took actually a long time for on the podcast to actually have another stay-at-home dad, but I I recently released an episode with someone that was a stay-at-home dad for about a year, also based in the States. And the next one I released was with a guy in the UK who took up 6 months of parental leave when his kids were like 6 months old, so quite a considerable
Okay.
amount of time as being the primary caregiver. What I've seen here in the Netherlands is not super common. In fact, I haven't met anyone that does. But what's more common is for parents to work part-time or to work like 4 days a week and
Okay.
split, like to have one day with the dad or one day with the mum. They might do
Interesting.
like daycare for one day, grandparents for one day, and then
Yeah.
mum for 2 days and dad for one day. That's sort of like kind of like balancing act. And that's a lot of Dutch families, but then even some expat families will do that as well, some international families. So the nature of the dad kind of being there at the toddler music class, for example, is pretty normal, because quite often the dad, like, it falls on Daddy's Day or Papa Duck, as they call it.
Okay.
So I have a lot of people come up to me when we're out and about with my kids, and they'll just kind of say to me, like, they're kind of making small talk, Papa Duck. They're like asking me, "Oh, Daddy's Day," and I was like, "Well, no, that's every day is like this."
Every day is Papa
Um,
Doc.
yeah, exactly. So, but that's the culture here. So they see that and they assume that, which is
Yeah.
like kind of interesting and kind of nice. They just don't assume you're going to be the primary caregiver.
Hmm.
I'd say I think one of my experiences that I have fairly frequently that can kind of, I think, get at the heart of what you're talking about, the kind of slight awkwardness. I help run a play group. Like there's a cafe that it's like an all volunteer run cafe. They do lots of classes, like after school clubs for the school that my wife works at. So this lady and I, who I started like meeting up with, who has a daughter around my son's age, we went there like, and when they were having like an open day, and we said, "Oh, we'd like to run a play group. We have lots of like, you have this nice little area with lots of nice toys and blah blah blah." And I'm like, "Yeah, that'd be a great idea, like a free play group for kids between 0 and 4."
Right.
And it's going quite successful now. This is in its second year, and it's pretty successful. We can maybe have like 6 or 7 parents with bring their kids every week, but it's pretty much always been the mums that have come. There maybe been dad once or twice that like kind of my friends who happen to have a random day off that have come. And what quite often happens is kind of like, to the point of highlighting what kind is kind of the awkwardness, is there'll be times when I will just kind of purposefully kind of fade into the background
Yeah.
because I'm in a situation with 5 or 6 other mums,
Yeah.
and they're going to talk about mum stuff. They're not going to talk about
Yeah.
parenting stuff. They might fall into talking about mum stuff, and that's completely fine. They're not doing it to single me. They're not doing it to shut me out. But they have their own challenges, such as breastfeeding or recovering from childbirth or whatever it might be. And
Right.
like, it's not my place to then comment on behalf of my wife or our family in that situation. So I will just kind of like check out and like check
Yeah.
back in if someone comes and talks to me. And that's kind of the thing that kind of happens. Like, no one's trying to do it to make me upset. No one's
Yeah.
trying to leave me out. They don't view me as like wrong for being there, but they're just going to connect better because they're all mums. And at the same time, finding dads that you can get together will help you connect with other people, not just you, but other
Exactly.
dads. So yeah, that might be a nice segue actually to talk about your dad walks thing. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking that's a perfect segue. Uh, so let me find the best way to describe it. So as I was transitioning to being a stay-at-home dad, you know, Mark Zuckerberg must have figured it out and tweaked my algorithm on Instagram, because somehow I stumbled upon an account called the Nashville Dads, and I'd love for you to
Okay,
connect with those guys eventually too. And so,
for
because
sure.
they're
Yeah.
similar groups, so they have a podcast, and they were doing weekly Saturday walks and some dad hangs, and so I connected with them, um, and became friends with those guys. There's a couple stay home dads in that group. but it's also like a hodgepodge of like some guys are part-time, some guys are working full-time. But that group allowed
Mm,
me to kind of connect with other dads who I could empathize with.
mm,
They still have the podcast going, but one of the dads moved out to Colorado. And so he asked me
right.
to spin off, kind of separate the podcast from the walks. And so now I run the Nashville Dad Walks, which is like the community
Mm,
part of it. So I organize the walks. I'll try to go myself, depending on my kids, and then sometimes I'll organize like we call them in the States like DNOs, Dad Night Out, and
mm,
get the guys together to like you know grab a drink at the pub and watch a game or go mini golfing or something like that. So that's what it's evolved into. And sometimes I have these grand visions of doing other community events with like mom groups or parent groups. But then the day, like I think the MVP, like the minimal viable product I want to put out there is just like a safe space for other dads to come to.
mm,
If you want to come to the walk, great. If you need other dads to connect to, like we want to be that source for you within the Nashville area. Because I think that's hard to find. And,
mm,
being with these guys and now running the walks, like I've had some incredible conversations, some really like heart to hearts with other guys about, what they
mm,
struggled with as a dad, what they're struggling with now. And it just makes me feel like I'm in the right place. And if I could copy and paste that to every other major metropolitan area in the world, I wish I could. But like it's been really great.
mm,
And so that's what we're doing. We're just trying to I think we've built the community now. It's maintaining and maybe growing the community so other dads
mm.
can feel that they can be part of it.
And would you would you say there's like a large? Do you guys have like a big group where you can kind of like communicate separately, like to the walks? Do you have like a WhatsApp group or something like that where you
Oh
kind of
yeah,
talk
we
about it, or is
there's
it
this
just getting together?
we use Group Me. Have you heard of Group
Okay,
Me? It's like a
kind of rings a
WhatsApp.
bell, but
Yeah, I hadn't heard of it. It's very comparable to a WhatsApp where you can like organize
mm,
group chat. So we have our own Group Meet channel, and so I'll message out the guys on that, and we can have more like important dialogue on that. But then I still have the Instagram where in case like a dad who's not part of our community might want to see us
mm,
and be part of it. And yeah, so we run both, but the Group Me is for like how we text one another and stuff like that.
yeah, it's awesome. No, I think it's such a good idea, and I think if anyone is listening who hasn't kind of done something like this before or got involved, even just the time because you do it on Saturday mornings,
Yep.
I fully believe that if you can get your kids out of the house for a 9:30 meet somewhere for something, your
Yeah.
weekend is going to be so much better if you get out of the house, like get going as soon as you can. Like don't let people lie in. Like don't potter around the house doing whatever. Like if you can get out, get going, and then you get the kids back and they've used up some of their energy, and then the rest of your weekend, I always find is just so much better.
Yeah. And your partner will be grateful.
Hmm.
And yeah, if there's any dads who listen to this podcast and have questions about it, I mean, it's not rocket science
Mm.
what the initial Nashville dads did and building that out. But if there's tips that we can give, because I think it's really important and just like, yeah, I'm very grateful that I found these guys and that now they're part of
Mm.
my community because I think it made my transition to being a stay-at-home dad much easier.
Yeah, for sure. This reminds me of if anyone has listened to this show, right the way back when I was still kind of figuring stuff out, in episode 4, I interviewed this guy called Joe, who is actually from America, but he's lived in the Netherlands for quite a long time now. He runs a dad meetup group for every Saturday morning. They will go to a playground. He chooses like a
Yeah.
different playground each time, or like a park or whatever. And if it's going to be raining, we sometimes might do an inside thing. But so he started that out when his kid was 6 months old, like his oldest. The kid is now 5 years old, and he just started going to the local park like every Saturday. I'm just going to take my six
Yeah.
month old for a walk and just do this. And then he started like talking to other dads, and he got some numbers, and then he made a WhatsApp group. And I think the WhatsApp group has like 400 people in it or 500 people in it now, somewhere in that
Oh,
region.
wow. That's
And
incredible.
it's like the dad group. He calls it the Good Dad Club. And there are people in there that have never been to a meetup, and like we
Yeah.
do like the very occasional like dad night out thing as well. And so there are people that have been in that group that have never come to any of these things, but it's this huge collective where people can talk and share and ask for recommendations on, someone asked for recommendations for like Indian food the other day, and that was just like ping, 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 ping. Like everyone wants to share their recommendations for food.
Yeah.
People are less likely to give you the recommendations for like a really reliable plumber or builder, but like people do, and like that happens. And yes, it's this huge community that exists, and then like the Saturday meetup is like a smaller thing, but is like part of the ecosystem in a way. And
Right.
even just some of those like that, I always tried to get to that every week when I first moved here. And yeah, some of the conversations that I was having there is kind of what led me into doing this, because I was like, I think like I was talking to a guy that was thinking about having a second child, and he was just asking so many good questions, because they were at that stage of like really considering it.
Yeah.
And like he was asking me all these questions that he clearly didn't have time or anyone in his life to ask those questions to. So I was like, dads have these questions, and I think these are good questions to talk about. So that's kind of what started this podcast in a way. It led into that. So
I think it's phenomenal. I think the podcast that you're doing is great, because I think if we as men want to try to be the best partners, if you're for our wives or other partners, like I think we need to build a community to better understand and to use the resources and to ask those questions. Yeah, I'm an advocate for all those resources. There's other Facebook groups I'm part of, and these meetups, but yeah, I think it's a really important tool, because I think our generation of dads, just like, we want to be the best dads we can be and the best partners we can be. But we also know that takes a lot of work, and that's the best part of doing, is just talking to other people. So
yeah, I agree.
So
how many
kids do you have, by the way?
I have 2 kids. So
Okay.
I have 2 boys. They're nearly 4 and nearly 2. So I've kind of similar gap to you.
Oh yeah.
I want to circle back actually to you're looking forward to welcoming number 3 into the mix. What is that? Do you have? Remember, we said that plans can often be so difficult to come by. Do you have some sort of plan of what like kind of childcare is going to look like in terms of stay-at-home parenting, and what life will be like once you and your wife are outnumbered?
Yeah. And it's funny, like, speaking of plans, like, my wife and I grew up in Washington, D.C., and then spent some time in L.A. for her. She's in medicine, so she did medical training out in L.A., and we loved it, and we loved our life there. And like, kids was like the furthest thing from our radar. And so, but towards the end of our time there, we started to think about it, and then we had our first. But if you would have told me, like, starting at almost 35 when we did, like, that we'd think about having more than 2 and like having a third, like, I would have been like, no, you're crazy. But in terms of our childcare plan, I think the plan is to continue as is with me in this role. Like, there's some things that my wife needs to figure out with her job, and there's a bunch of variables, but I think our oldest is in daycare right now. My 2-year-old, who I'm staring at right now, will start going part-time in 2025. And so the idea is that she'll go part-time 2 or 3 days a week, and then I'll be at home with the third, and some days I'll be home with both of them. But I think that system will kind of work for us right now. The older they get, the more challenging they are, but they also become more independent. So the 4-year-old, I feel like, requires less physical work and just making sure. So yeah, I think the plan is for me to continue in this role. And then, if things evolve in the future with my career, or if there's something I want to change, then I think we can do that. But, I still feel like I'm new to this. I'm within like the first year of my job as a stay-at-home dad. So I want to see it out. And, but yeah, the third one's going to change a lot of things. And, maybe we can do a podcast revisit after the third comes, and maybe I'm like, I can't do it. But there's something that tells me that, like, I think I can. And especially because I have an amazing partner, and I really enjoy fatherhood. It took me a while to get there. Like the first 6 months when we had my oldest, like the first 6 months, I was like, what is this thing? I did not, like, I romanticized what this idea of fatherhood was going to be. And it wasn't that. I struggled with like some sort of postpartum paternal depression in some ways. Like it really struggled the first 6 months of the first one. But ever since then, I feel like I've kind of clicked into it. And then especially having our second, like, I just feel like I'm not a perfect dad, but I enjoy the crap out of it, and I love it. And so, yeah, the plan is for me to be stay at home. And, I don't know if that's for another year or 2 years, 3 years, what that looks like. But but I've made peace with the fact that my career is going to look different when and if I go back to work,
Mm.
and I'm okay with that. Like it's
Yeah.
that's life, Because as far as I'm concerned, and I don't know how you feel about it, but like, when you're on your deathbed, I'm pretty sure no one says, "Oh, I wish I'd spent less time with my kids." No one ever says that.
Yeah.
No, they were like, "Oh,
Yep.
I wish I'd done less work." So like, I know like the career stuff is gonna be secondary, and so I'm gonna love this
Mm.
opportunity.
Did you know you can get access 1 week early to all the Dad Dialogue interviews by signing up on our Patreon? The link is in the description. There are also some other cool benefits and different tiers. Please go check it out. I'd love for you to be able to join us over there, and I really appreciate any support that you would like to throw my way to support the podcast and the plans I have to keep growing the brand. Let's get back to the conversation. Yeah, there's a lot in there that I would like to kind of like to drill into a little bit. I kind of identify similar with the first 6 months. I think looking back on my time, I've often thought about this from kind of as like a teaching method or like an awareness, let's say, or for parents or dads that are people that prepare and become dads, let's say, get the words out eventually, that
Yeah, yeah.
you do have a romanticized version of what fatherhood's going to look like for those first 6 months. And you kind of, at least when I look back on that time and like what I say to other people is really important, is like you're going to have some feelings, and these feelings, whilst from a psychological point of view or a therapist point of view, like feelings are valid and you need to like appreciate your
Yeah.
feelings, but there's the wife that's just given birth and this newborn child whose feelings are far more important than yours. And if you're kind of feeling unloved, let's say, or like it's not what you thought it was going to be, you kind of have to, for lack of a better word, just kind of suck it up for a little bit and just kind of like do what you
Yeah.
need to do. Because I was just like, all this thing does is like poop and cry and want is his mother, like
Hmm.
because she's breastfeeding him. Like what can I offer? Am I supposed to have this immediate bond with this like crying, screaming, pooping thing? And
Yeah.
I would kind of get caught in these like vicious cycles of like, oh, I'm not going to be a good dad because I'm not feeling this love, this like, the
Yeah.
movie picture of like the baby grabs the finger and like the dad falls in
Those
love and all this
movies.
sorts of stuff.
Oh my God.
And it's just like you kind of get caught in these, as I said, this cycle, and you just need to be present to what you need, like what your wife needs and what the child needs, and that might look different on a different day. So yeah, I think I appreciate you kind of sharing. Would you say that's kind of similar from your perspective of those kind of first 6 months?
100%. Like, I
Right.
think, yeah, your feelings are valid and you should talk to people and figure it out, but you understand that those feelings are temporary. Like, they will go away even in
Mm.
the thick of it. But you mentioned something about like the movies and how they romanticize it. Like, I blame those movies. I blame my dad. My dad also is like, he's like, as soon as I grabbed your thumb, I had this bond. I was like, I look back on it, I was like, you're a liar. Because like I did not have that bond with my oldest right away, and learning that that's okay is really important. And I think talking
Mm.
about that, not settling into this hole by yourself and blaming yourself, knowing that this is normal. Some people do have a bond right away. That's great. But sometimes
Yeah.
a lot of dads are, and even some moms struggle with it and know that it's temporary and that
Mm.
this is the biggest life adjustment you will ever go through. It's the hardest job you'll ever do. And to think that you're going to ease into it, it's naive. And so I think
Yeah.
learning to adjust to it. So I empathize with a lot of what you say, and I'm grateful that you're sharing it. I want more dads to share it if they've gone through it because
Mm.
it's a struggle. And know that you can come out on the other side as a better partner and better
Mm.
dad. And yeah,
Yeah, and I think what I find really interesting, if you look back on it, and especially if you talk to people that are preparing to become parents for the first time, like there's so much to do, or at least it feels like there's so much to do when you're preparing to become a parent. Like you read all the books, you get like your nursery ready, you maybe plan out your route to the hospital, you get the car seat, and like, there's all this stuff that you do. And we even did like classes of like learning how to swaddle a
hmm
baby, learning how to change the nappy, learning what you need to do if the poop looks like this color, learning what you need to do if they do this, like all this sort of stuff, which is very, I'm not saying it's wrong, it's all very practical or very useful, but there was no real like, yeah, you need to be prepared for like if your wife starts showing these signs of like a postnatal depression or postnatal anxiety or whatever it might be, like a postnatal something. And I remember reading it in like one book, like buried in there, like that. Just be on the lookout for these things, and they didn't say what any of the symptoms were or what it could be. But yeah, I think, like you said, like it happens to mums as well. It's not just dads that these feelings can happen, and they can get caught up in the I'm not feeling this way towards my child yet. Super, super important to have some understanding that there is research and there's support and people have gone through it before, and you're not alone. Because in those moments of like having a newborn crying and screaming, like you do feel very isolated. So yeah, I hope, and that's why I think podcasts are good, because when people are trying to get a newborn to sleep, they might listen to a podcast. So I think the format is good. Like everyone can talk about reading, and reading is great, but you know, it's not always easy when you've got little ones going around. So that's my take anyway.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of advice out there that focuses on the tactical things about being a parent. Um, but the soft things about like what to look for in your partner, what to look for within yourself are not as robust and ubiquitous in the world. And so I think even formats like a podcast or dad groups are really helpful. But yeah, I mean, it's like I think people downplay like it's like the biggest adjustment you will ever go through in your life. And like you can talk to as many dads as you want. You can talk to your own parents. You can take as many classes as you want. But when it comes, like you're gonna have these feelings, and it's gonna feel different. And
yeah,
you know, it's really hard to get used to. But it's a beautiful thing when you get around that curve.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. So I'm curious. You had mentioned something to me when we were chatting via email about like the first time that your wife went away and you were kind of like had the responsibility of your two kids, and the kind of like maybe the concern and the anxiety that might have come in from that experience. Can you talk a little bit about that? How old were they when the first time you kind of had to hold down the fort all by yourself with two young kids? Do you remember?
Yeah, I think so. My wife, she's in medicine, as I mentioned, and she had to do like some weekend call. And I want to say my youngest was maybe 4 or 5 months, and my oldest had just like
Okay, wow.
was just over 2. And yeah, it was pretty scary, just because I think even as dads, like I know for me, like my wife is my safety net, and I try not to put too much emotional baggage on her, but like she keeps me calm. And so she prepared me for that moment. And I think she was only gone for like 6 hours. You know, her call ended up being shorter, but you know, for me, the way I focused on it was at a very core level. I was like, as long as I keep them alive and fed, like they're going to be okay. Things are going to go wrong. And I did that. And like walking away from that weekend gave me this confidence to like, okay, like I kind of know what I'm doing, like, and I'm going to be okay. And it's funny that you mentioned, I don't even remember sending that to you in the email, but now that you mention it, I kind of look at it as like the turning point in like my journey as a father. You know, the first one was the first one. And then you have, we had 2 under 2 for a few months, and it's just this chaos. And then it's like, yeah, at that moment, I kind of felt like, oh, wait, like I can do this, and I kind of like it, and I enjoy it. And I think I might be average at it, and above average maybe some days, below average others. And so I was like, this is cool. I can do this. And yeah, even now, my wife is she's taking a trip tonight, and she's gonna be gone for a couple of days. And so yeah, it'll be just be me and the girls, and you know, taking the oldest to school, hang out with the youngest one during the day, and just surviving. And you know, the more you like focus on surviving, then you sort of evolved into you evolve into like, then you're like, you get more confidence, like, oh, we can do this. I feel like comfortable just taking them over here, or like we're gonna make homemade pizzas tonight. Like I think at the way I approach it was at the very beginning was like, keep them alive, keep them fed. And then ever since I started doing that and get more confidence, like, oh, we can go on a walk together, or I can take you to the zoo together. And so it may seem like simple things. And to any non-dads listening to this podcast, you're probably like, he's talking like a foreign language. What is he saying? But it's fun. I'm glad you brought that up, because I think back at it, it's like a seminal moment in my journey as a father. And, you know, without conquering that moment, I don't think I'd be ready or excited for a third, or even open to having a third. And so it was a really cool moment, and I've grown since then. So I don't know. Did you have like a similar moment for yourself when you had maybe even before your second one came or after your second one came, where you're like, okay, I think I
Yeah.
can get this.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm like the time before being a stay-at-home dad is seems a bit like a blur. I mean, we definitely would have had days,
Right.
like I would have done, maybe a half day or things. When we still, I mean, obviously when we still lived in Asia, things looked very different because we were both working.
Right.
We had the live-in nanny. So like, I think the longest stretch maybe would have been a few hours, like a morning or an afternoon or whatever. But yeah, I totally agree that like you start to gain that confidence. And there are two really important things that I've learned from various experiences. Like, my wife doesn't travel much. She went on a holiday once. She went for like a 4-day holiday about April, May time this year
Okay.
in 2024. So like that was like the only time that kind of one of us has traveled for a long time. And so, yeah, like that was a process for sure. But it was the stuff that I'd learned leading up to that that allowed it to be confident and straightforward. And one of those two things is that communicating expectations I found was always really important. Like knowing, so when we started the stay-at-home dad thing, knowing that my wife is happy to come home and my kids are like happy, they're healthy, they're fed, they're clean. Like that's kind of like the
Cleanish.
expectations.
Yeah.
Cleanish, yeah, like haven't
Yeah.
been walking around with like a soiled nappy or soiled diaper for
Yeah.
hours. Um, but like, because you can kind of get in your head of like, I have to have dinner on the table. I have to have done all the laundry. I have to have done this and I have to have done that. And you can tell yourself
Yeah.
that someone else would want that to be done. And that could be true. The other person
Mhm.
might want that to be, and that could be a nice thing, but they're not expecting it. And the difference between doing something that's nice for someone and doing like kind of what's expected is super different. And that's where you can kind of like let yourself off the hook a little bit. Because if you know that your partner is just expecting a certain thing, then that's the baseline. That's what you provide. And then anything above that is going above and beyond because you've spoken about it and you've agreed upon it. So I know that like, yeah, if I'm able to do a load of laundry while she's out, that's great. Like that's an extra
Yeah.
bonus. Like fantastic, but it's not expected. And I don't have to get stressed out if I'm not able to do it. So that's one thing. Like once I kind of came to terms with that, that was super important. The other thing that I always say is first is the worst. So first and just being like first experience of something. So like the first time that you tried to get a 2-year-old and an 8-month-old to nap at the same time, to go into that bedroom with like the twinkle twinkle playing with some books. Like the first time you try and do that, it's probably not going to go fantastically well. But you're going to learn some things for the next time and the next time and the next time and the next time. And then by the time you do it, lots of times it's way better. And that applies to, like you said, you were going to the zoo. We go to like this model, there's a place here called Maduro Dam. It's like this model village thing. We now have season passes. We've gone there quite a lot now. And the first time I went there with both of them by myself is a little bit stressful because like they just want to run off. And like once they kind of beeline for
When's this?
the opposite
Yeah.
way, like, right, who do I follow? Who do I keep safe sort of thing. And like that was like a little bit stressful, but now like we do it quite a lot, and like we're so happy, and we know what we're doing, and each time gets better and better and better. And I always think like, yeah, the first time you do something by yourself solo might be a little bit stressful, but you're going to learn, and then just go and do that thing again, and you're going to do a lot better next time. So once you kind of come to terms with that, I found made life a lot easier.
To your second point, I forgot to mention that I think it was that first weekend I was by myself, and somehow the second one was on 2 or 3 naps, and the first one, my oldest one, was on 1 nap. But somehow the naps aligned. It's like, oh my god, this is great. I'm gonna get like maybe 30, 40 minutes. Maybe I'll just fall asleep. And I sit on the couch. And as soon as I close my eyes, I hear a door open. I'm like, that's not normal because they were both in cribs. It was the first weekend that my 2-year-old found a way to get out of her crib. Like literally that weekend. And once they get out of the crib the first time, it's like game over. You kind of have to adjust it to like a bed. And so, yeah, that was the wild card that happened to me that weekend. And, I think it made me even tougher. And then to your first point about, and I think your wife and my wife are very similar. Like she's made it clear. She's like, yeah, if you can do the laundry and have dinner done, great. But like the things are keep them happy, keep them fed, keep them alive, keep them clean. And like, that's really helped me maintain my stress level. And another thing, and I don't know if you try to aim for it. I try to aim to make sure that like when my wife comes home, that she's not walking through that door with like the kids stressed. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it's not like, oh, you're home, let me just give them to you kind of thing. Like I really
Yeah.
try to make sure that like sometimes she's had a long day, and I'm sure your wife has too, and they want to maybe take a bath or something, and like just making sure that like it's not this hard transition, that it's a gradual transition. Um, it's something that I've like actively worked on, because my wife made it clear that when I did this, she's like, well, when I come home, I'll need this, and so I'm ready to. And
Mm.
my wife was like, and it sounds like your wife is like, she loves being a mom and very active. And sometimes she'll drop her bag
Mm.
off and go right in, and she'll jump right in. But other days she'll
Mm.
need that. And so like learning that like when she comes home, my job is not done. And I
Mm.
think that's something that's tough, because it's nice to have the other parent around where you're like, all right, I can catch a breath. But sometimes
Yeah.
like they need to catch a breath too. And then your breath is gonna
Yeah.
come later.
Yeah. And it's just all about communicating, right? Like if you
Yeah.
have that understanding and that awareness that like, okay, like, yeah, I remember having that conversation with my wife before I did it. I don't know if you've read it. There's a book called The Ultimate Stay-at-Home Dad Guide or something. It's like, I can't remember the author. It's like a yellow book.
Oh, really?
Oh gosh, I can't remember the guy's name. He's in America, and like he's been a stay-at-home dad for a long time, maybe like 15 years or something. So he was able to talk about it from a from a while ago of what life kind of looked like and how it's progressed. But yeah, he made that point very clear. Like just because your partner's in doesn't mean that like you're off duty, and you have to have that really open and clear communication. And yeah, like you communicate what's expected both ways, and then everyone's going to be happy. So it's the same way of like, finding time to do a podcast like this, like in terms of structuring our time and communicating and making sure everyone kind of gets like the what they want out of our life. Yeah, it's super important that those are communication of expectations.
Yeah. And actually, to build off that, before I became a stay-at-home dad, like one of the co-creators of Nashville Dads, he's also named Devin. He's the one that moved to Colorado. I asked him for some
Mm,
advice, and he's like, sit down with your wife and like come to agreement on what expectations are. Like, what does success look like for
mm,
you? What does success look like for her, of what you want to do? Because it's a big change, and just making sure that you're aligned on what your vision is. And it sounds like you and your wife did that,
mm.
and we did to some extent too. And then we kind of had to adjust halfway through. But I think that communication is really key. So
Yeah, we do it. I'm trying to think. Like we try and sit down and have those sorts of chats like fairly frequently, because it is one of those
yeah,
things that like you could do it before you go into it. Like you always have to have a plan of some description. That's the really important thing. You can't go into this like, I'm going to be a stay-at-home dad, and just go in like, oh, I'll just play it by ear. We'll just do whatever we can, and like the kids will get up and we'll do this. Like you have to have a schedule of some description. Things might not go to your plan. Things might not work out the way you've planned them to. But at least if you have that schedule, you can then kind of adjust as needs be. And I think the same goes within a marriage and within a relationship. Like you try and communicate, this is what we're going to try and do, and then you reevaluate if it's going to work or not.
So you mentioned you're a football fan. So by the way, I should be clear, before I became a stay-at-home dad, I used to travel a lot for work, and I would go through the
Mm-hmm.
Netherlands a lot. And so yeah.
Okay.
Uh, and so, but I'm also a football fan. So like my dad took me and my younger brother to the 2010 World Cup. I'm going to
Oh,
take
okay,
the girls
cool.
to the 2020. I'm going to take them to the 2026 World Cup here in the States and Canada and
Yeah.
Mexico. Um, and like I grew up playing it. I don't have a chance to watch it as much because the EPL comes on so early here, and like the MLS is like,
Mm,
it's getting there, but it's not the same product, right? And so I was
mm.
curious. I wanted to know what team you followed.
So I actually follow Newcastle United. I'm from England. I'm from actually the south of England, like
Yeah,
near London. My dad's family, so my grandmother was from Chelsea. Like she was born and raised in Chelsea. Her family was from Chelsea. She was such an avid Chelsea fan. My dad was a Chelsea fan. They moved
before
out
the
of
Russian
Chelsea
oligarch, before the
to
Russian billionaires bought them, right?
oh yeah, long before that. Yeah,
Way
yeah, yeah.
before, yeah. Okay.
Like when my dad was a kid, sort of thing. Like way before they were like hugely successful. Just an area of West London. They moved to a town in the south, which is just like a London sub, like a commuter town for London. And when I started growing up in the 90s, I was a kid in like the 90s. I just got into football when Alan Shearer
Alan
was
Shearer.
just
Yeah.
scoring all the goals for Newcastle. And I liked the kit, so I got the kit, and then I became a Newcastle fan. And the rest, as they say, is history. My dad. This is actually like, to kind of link it back to the dad thing. My, you know, my dad made a lot of mistakes in his fathering journey, but he never got upset by the fact that I didn't support Chelsea. He took me to a few Chelsea games, actually.
Yeah.
And I was always a Newcastle fan. He never tried to change my mind. And he even
Yeah.
like planned trips for us. We went like we did like the 8-hour drive up north to do it. And I could tell, like, I remember looking back when he passed away like 8 years ago, he tried to maintain a relationship with me after my parents divorced. And like, he was very apparent that like doing these big things, like driving the length of the country to go to the Newcastle ground and like watch a game. You know, he tried his best to do that for me because he clearly did love me. And this was like one of those things that was like a really kind of big realization at the time when I was like a 15-year-old. You can't really see that. It's just like, oh, this is just what dad's doing sort of thing. But, you know, that would have been like a big thing to like kind of go that far and to kind of even just to accept the fact that like your son is choosing to support a different team so far away. So yeah, it's an interesting link actually into like the fathering aspect of life. And you know, after I got married, I moved away from England and I kind of stopped following football a little bit. It's a little bit different to when I was like kind of getting into it, let's say. But I don't know, if my kids get into it, they will. My son actually said the other day, he's like, "Oh, I'm from the Netherlands," which is really interesting because he wasn't born here. But you know, he goes to a Dutch school. He's trying to learn Dutch. So if he grows up identifying as that, then I guess he can support some of the Dutch players that will be kind of in the team when he's a bit older.
Yeah. I mean, the Dutch have always had a great football team. They're one of my favorite national teams to root for outside the U.S. And like, I think about like what I want to share with my kids, and sometimes that connection you have with your kids, you don't know what it's gonna be, right? It could be football. Maybe my girls love football. The women's team here is great, or maybe it's something else. But once you find that thing, it's pretty special. And yeah, it happened with my father. You know, he's not very athletic, but he likes sport. Specifically, football and American football. But just kind of finding that connection with your kids is pretty special. But like, I am gonna take them to the 2026 World Cup here because just because it's such a unique opportunity.
Yeah, that's going to be really cool. No, I agree. And I think it's when you talk about kind of creating those memories and creating that bond, you just have to try things. I was even just one of the episodes I'm releasing soon. We were talking about what children's like extra interests are, like this kind of like extracurriculars, like things that they do outside of school, whether it be like playing football or playing a sport or playing a musical instrument or whatever it might be. Like, I always find those sort of conversations really interesting because I feel like every parent kind of goes into it with their own experience and they want to apply that to their children. It's like, well, I went and did piano lessons all this time and this is what I think is the best way to do it. And well, I did this and my dad let me do this, all this sort of stuff. So I always find those sorts of stories super interesting from people that are a bit further along. And the episode that I'm just editing right now is hilarious. The guy said that his son's school offers extra, like after school laser tag. Basically, like a company comes to his school with like all the gear and they put it on and they just run around the school playing laser tag. And he's like, yeah, he really enjoys that. And I was like, yeah, I wonder why. I think every child would, right? That sounds amazing. Like choosing to do that and, as your extracurricular.
I think a lot of adults would like that too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think it's really special to figure out what bond you're going to share with your kids and how it organically comes into view. And I should mention, like my dad liking sport and like my brother and I played football. I'm going to call it football just, because
I appreciate
we
it.
played football growing up. And, he grew up in the Midwest, US in like the, 60s and 70s. So like football wasn't a thing, like American football was. And so like he didn't really get into the sport until like after my brother and I got into it as kids. And so to see him get into it because we played it and to see his passion and now he watches it all the time. And it was him who wanted to take us to the World Cup and wants to take the grandkids to the World Cup in 2026. So
So I'm curious. The question I love to ask all guests on the show, as we kind of come up to the end of our time, you've obviously got some things to be getting on with over there. I don't want to take up
I
too much more of your
apologize.
time, but it's all good, man. It's I love it. It's like, I think this is the first time we've ever had like the live like parenting going on during. So is it very very authentic. But I'm
Good,
curious.
yes, organic and authentic. Yeah. What's
Yeah,
what's the
exactly.
question?
If you think back to yourself before you became a dad, so maybe about 4.5 years ago, 5 years ago, before your oldest daughter was born, what advice do you think Devin would need to hear then? I think we spoke a little bit about kind of like new parenting aspects. It might be related to that, or it could be something completely different.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it would be, like, similar to what we've been talking about. I think it would be like, I would tell the younger version of myself that again, I've said this a couple times throughout our conversation, is like, this is the
Mm,
hardest job you'll ever have, and it's okay to be scared and sad and,
mm,
um, a little bit, depressed sometimes, but talk to people, talk to dads who can empathize with you, because or talk to other parents too, and because that sort of community is the thing that will help you become a better parent. So just I would this is sort of non-direct, but if I only had like 10 seconds, I would tell my younger version, like, this is the hardest job you have. Those feelings are going to be okay. Talk to people and
mm,
talk to a community, and they can help you get through. And
mm,
I think that would be what I would try to convey. Um, and I would also, I don't know what this wouldn't be advice, but the second thing I would say is like, I would also say, believe it or not, which one do you want? This one. I would say this is the best thing that's gonna ever happen to you.
mm,
Like, because
yeah.
I firmly believe being a parent is the best thing that's ever happened to me besides meeting my wife. But
Mm,
just because it's the best thing doesn't mean every day is perfect or not
mm,
messy or it can't be stressful. But like this this is the best thing that's ever happened to me. This makes life awesome. It gives me
mm,
a clear vision of my purpose in life. And that doesn't mean it's easy, but like that's how I
mm.
feel about it.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's such a nice way to kind of round it off with like that kind of vision. And I totally agree. Once you kind of have that understanding of, and also like appreciating the here and now is awesome, like being a dad and being present in every moment, but also being able to look forward, like we're saying, like to a World Cup experience that you will try and arrange for them, or when they are teenagers and you want to do a road trip to take them to their favorite sports ground or whatever. Like these are things that we can think about and not plan for, but look forward to the possibility of them existing. And I think that's a really powerful and awesome thing to kind of remind ourselves. Um,
It really is.
so yeah, awesome, Devin. Thank you so much for taking the time. It's as I said, it's awesome to kind of have someone that's in the midst of it. The authenticity is awesome. But yeah, thanks so much for taking the time and joining us here today on the Dad Dialogue podcast.
Well, thank you for having me, Lawrence, and thanks for being patient with the technical difficulties and the non-technical difficulties. I think what you're doing is really important and powerful, and don't touch that. I would love to stay in touch going forward. I know I'm going to watch
Yeah, man.
I'm going to listen to other podcasts and watch what you do, but I'd love to stay in touch because it was just great to talk to you and get to know you, and thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for the time. And there we have another Dad Dialogue conversation. Of course, a huge thank you goes out to Devin for coming on the show and sharing his stories with us. I'm sure you'll agree with me that it was quite unique to have that in-person parenting and how Devin had to kind of split his time between chatting to us at the end and have this daughter. I was amazed that he could kind of give so much of his attention to the interview with his daughter there. If it was one of my kids, they would have been trying to take all the attention during that whole time. So I was super impressed. It was super cool to chat to Devin about so many different topics. I love the idea of the Dad Walks group that he is a part of. I would really encourage you to check it out, even if you're not in the area. Of course, if you are in the Nashville area and you're curious, link to his Instagram will be in the description. Do go check it out. But if you're not part of a similar sort of dads group that has these regular meetups or like a WhatsApp group or something to chat with, I would really encourage you to go and check out Devin's, learn a little bit more about it, see if it's something that you can find in your area, or if you can't find it, think about setting it up yourself. It's such a powerful tool and really can help men and fathers achieve so much more when we come together and do these sorts of things. So I really hope you enjoyed this episode. Again, daddialogue.co.uk if you'd like to get in touch with me or sign up to be a guest for a future episode. I hope to talk to you again soon. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye.